Welcome to another What's on Your Mind. Normally this is, oh, these are fucking so bad. Normally this is on Tuesday nights, but had to shuffle things a little bit this week, so we're bringing it on a Thursday. But it is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. It's a topic that I always try to make sure to especially highlight this one because it's something that is close to home for me personally. So I try to make sure that I definitely give it some time to bring awareness to it, to talk about it. So, there's Drummond. I am so happy today to talk about it because I feel like we don't often hear about it from a man's aspect. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, no problem.
I always love our chats, even though this one's not as fun as some of our other topics, but it's still good to talk.
Yeah, I was telling my friend Michael, I was like, I have to like mentally prepare for today's live because it's not always the easiest to talk about for sure.
Oh yeah. I think I'm at like bat and zero for not crying during talking about it. So, but I
Yeah,
think this one should be okay because I'll be asking you more questions. I mean, I'll talk as well, and you can ask me anything as always.
yeah.
Um, Before we get started, for those joining who don't normally join us. My name is Nimade, or that African butterfly. As I am known on social media, I do lives about different topics, but especially self-love on Sundays and mental health, and then other topics ranging from different things. I'm also addicted to Bravo and have a series over on YouTube, and I just do random creative things that make me feel good and hopefully make other people feel good. Um, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I am Drummond, known as Drummond Culture Online. I have been doing social media for a while. Accidentally posted my coming out video on YouTube way back in the day before YouTube became a big thing. And ever since then, uh, sharing my authentic story to kind of help other people get through similar experiences has kind of been my thing. Domestic violence is something that I've also experienced in my lifetime in several different instances. And it took me a while to share that story. And it's still one that it takes a lot of mental strength to get through to talk about sometimes because I think that people who haven't been through it don't understand it as well. Uh, and I think that it's kind of hard to have those types of conversations because no matter how far you've grown or healed from that, it's still a part of your story. And I'm trying to be as vulnerable as possible because I know that that does help other people who have been through similar situations.
Mhm. Yeah, it absolutely does. And I always say it no matter, what we're talking about, because sometimes people are like, oh, why do people share such personal stuff? Or how can people be vocal? But I feel like you need the people to be vocal to help those who either can't or choose not to be, help them realize that they're not alone and that other people are dealing with the same thing. So even if they can't vocalize it, hearing someone else vocalize it is important. Now, on the topic of domestic violence, I had a run-in with it in my hi, Sweet Caroline. Thank you for joining us. I'm sorry to hear that you dealt with it as well. I dealt with it in my childhood. So, I mean, well, first of all, so domestic violence, there's so many different forms of it, and we always think of it in the forms of like relationships. But it's also, with parents and kids or just being around it. There's different forms. It's not always just physical, there's emotional, there's financial abuse as well. I was around it as a child. I witnessed it between my mom and my stepdad. So those were some very rough years for me. And I think more formative than I really gave license to. Like the older I get and the more I talk about it with my therapist, the more I realize like what an impact it had on me. Like I always knew, but definitely more than I realized it. But in your case, it was in your relationship, correct?
Yeah, so I dealt with it as a child as well as my relationships. I will say relationship. Once it happened to me and I finally got out of that, that was like the number one thing I made sure I never fell back into relationship wise. But I think I fell into it with my relationship mainly because it was such almost a normal thing for me to see as a child that I couldn't tell what was a healthy relationship when I started because this was my first relationship with a guy that I fell into a lot of mental and physical abuse. And I think that was mainly because it was almost like feeling at home or normal to me because I was so used to seeing it and having to experience it as a child.
Yeah, I think unfortunately for a lot of people that, especially during the formative years, if you're witnessing that abuse, because, those of us who have been around it know that after the abuse comes like the onslaught of love and like, I love you so much, I would never, like, blah, blah, blah. So then you're almost programmed to think like, oh, that's what love looks like. Love looks like them getting really upset, them hurting you, and then, they tell you how much they love you, and it's okay until you make them mad again, which isn't the case. But if you grow up around that, I think it's very easy to fall into that when you start having your own adult relationships, especially given that most physical relationships don't start out physical. It's a slower process. It starts with emotional and isolation. So that way, by the time they work up to hitting you, you almost feel like you deserve it because they beat you down so much emotionally. Is that how yours started?
Yeah, so I it was such a small, and for me being in my first gay relationship, like there was a lot of like attachments to that because I felt like for me personally, like this was finally what I really wanted in life. And I excused a lot of things that were probably signs and red flags because I was like, okay, this is a new relationship. I'm experiencing things like this is something that you just have to get over. And then I also grew up with a very strong Christian background. And so I had a belief system of once you've connected with someone, once you've given parts of yourself to that person, like that is your person.
Mm.
And I was in that mindset of like, I only wanted to be with one person ever in that way. So I had convinced myself that I could make it through it and that we could fix it and that it was just small parts in the beginning that we could overcome as a couple, which never really came to be for sure.
Mm. Yeah, I often I've done that in relationships in the past. Not that they've gotten to that extent, but I think sometimes you excuse the signs in the beginning because you're like, well, that's not really a deal breaker, and it's such a small thing, and I'm sure it'll get better, and I'm sure like it'll change later. And I know for me, I have to realize that I need to stop trying to date people's potential, like what I thought, what I think they would be like if this one thing was fixed or if this one thing was different. And then B, realizing there really is something to be said about the honeymoon period. And like if you are having that much struggle in the beginning, just stop because it usually typically does not get better. And even if it does, like it's worth it for you to have someone that makes you happy. Not that you have to struggle to get through it. It wasn't in a relationship. It was an adult in my life. So as a child, yeah. And that's a major form of abuse as well. Um, I don't want to be too triggering for you though, but like, do you remember the first time it got physical?
Yeah. It was actually a very, very intense moment. And like you were saying earlier, it was very much made to make me believe that somehow I was deserving of that. The first time my boyfriend ever got violent, we went on a hike that day, and I had assumed it was a lot shorter of a hike than it actually was. And he actually got in his car and drove alongside of the trail. And it was like 2 miles longer than I had said. And he was just like really upset about it. And I was very apologetic, but he started getting really angry and he started kind of like tossing things around. But then I was like, I'm not dealing with this. And I went to, because at this time I was a freshman in college, I went to leave my dorm room and I was going down the steps to just leave the situation. And he came up behind me and just pushed me down the flight of steps.
Oh my God.
And I know that he instantly realized that what he did was like really bad because he like fled, like he got out of the building and left and called some of my friends because he was in town visiting where I was from. But
Mhm.
he went and stayed with friends of mine and then later came back with an apology, but it was more of the, well, like you're the one who lied to me, you're the one who said that that was.
Look what you made me do.
And I feel like I knew that was wrong, but his way of manipulating my young mind was like, I mean, I did like misinform him, and like he did say that like his legs were hurting, that like he made it to where like I was convinced that there was definitely something that I did. I don't know if I ever fully like believed that I deserved to be pushed down a flight of steps, but like I believed that what I did was okay and would trigger someone to be that angry with someone.
So then what is it from there? Because I think a lot of people wonder when they talk to people and who have been in domestic violence relationships, it's like, well, how do you stay? Because I think most of us are like, they ever put their hands on me, I'm out. So like, what is it that makes you stay for it to continue? Especially, I think, as someone, because a lot of times I know, like with my mom, her big thing was us kids. My stepdad always threatened to take away the kids, and because we're from Liberia and born in Africa, where the guys do have so much control, she thought it was true. But I think people always wonder that, like, what makes you stay after they hurt you?
Yeah. Um, and I think that this is a question that like we all have a different answer to, and none of them will ever like actually be a good enough answer to stay with someone. But in those mindsets, like they make you really feel like you need them and that without them, uh, you would be like lesser than or missing out. I know I stayed with this person for 2 years. I transferred schools for this person even after I had been abused multiple times. Um, but for me, it was being in my first gay relationship, having my dad tell me I can't come home because he's not going to have a gay son living under his roof. So, in that sense, I really didn't feel like I had a place to go. And they, the situation I was in, he made me very isolated. When he started showing up on my campus like every weekend, then he
Mm.
started spending the weeks with me. Uh, it got to the point where he was really just pushing everyone out of my life to where I really did feel alone. And when I would put my foot down and cut him out as a person, um, he would hang out with my friends to where when I was trying to put space between him and me, uh, I was very alone. So then I was sitting there by myself dealing with that lonely feeling. And that was almost more painful than kind of putting up with that type of stuff. And it got to the point where I got rid of him and took him back and got rid of him and took him back, that my friends stopped believing that it was actually as bad as it was. They thought that I was over exaggerating the moments because
Mm.
no one in their right mind would stay with someone, push them down a flight of steps. Or I told them like when I moved to West Virginia that there were days that I slept in the spare bedroom and pushed the dresser in front of the door and slept with a knife smushed between the mattress and the wall just in case things got really bad, because there were so many times where I had to lie about why I had bruises, and it got rough, but it was something that happened so slowly over time that it seemed just normal, that it didn't really just hit me really hard as like, you got to get out now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it really is one of the biggest things that I think people need to be aware of for themselves to look out for. And then also when talking to people who have been in those situations, is that it really truly is rarely like from 0 to 60. Sometimes it is, but normally it's like a long breakdown. People will think, because we reference everything to like the movies and, oh, they hit her and blah, blah, blah. And like, yeah, if you're just dating and out of the blue, the person gets mad at you and smacks you, like you're probably going to be easier to break away from them than if they have taken the time to days, months, years slowly separate you from your family, slowly separate you from your friends, and then also talk down your esteem that, no one wants you, no one, you're not worthy of anything. So that way, when they hit you, it's like, oh, well, clearly I did something. And then when they forgive you, there's almost like a, oh, thank goodness. Like you're almost like relieved that they are accepting you back, even though they're really the ones that are at fault. And I think also that for whatever reason, people a lot of times expect bad people to look bad and be bad and just like, like when you see the villain in the movie and you can tell who they are, they think that, that's sort of how it's going to be, and it's not. Domestic violence people are almost usually the most charismatic people, and that's what makes them so hard to deal with and to identify, because it's hard to, and I had an instance with a coworker who actually ended up unfortunately killing his wife, and he's in jail now. But he was so charismatic. Like, and later I actually felt guilt because I had heard about the domestic violence stuff, and normally when I hear that, I'm very much like, because of my past, I'm like, I'm not giving you an extra chance. But he was so nice and so friendly. Like we do crafts for work and blah blah blah. So I was like, oh well, maybe it was just this thing, and then the other stuff happened later, and I had to remind myself that like domestic abusers are usually so charismatic and so jolly, and that's what makes it harder for the person getting abused to really get help and to really get people to believe them.
Yeah. I mean, I've dealt with abuse since I was a very, very young person. Like, I dealt with the fact that my mom's brother sexually abused me at the age of 5. So, and
I'm
I
sorry
remember,
that.
I remember I remember him telling me that I wasn't allowed to tell anybody, that I would go to hell if I told people, because what I did was wrong.
Mhm.
Um, so at the age of 5, like that's your time where you
Yeah,
believe you're adults. The adults
everything.
are
Yeah.
like, they're telling you the truth. And I remember keeping it a secret all the way up until like I was 18. I went to a Young Life camp and someone else told their story about being abused. And I actually opened up to him and we became like pen pals.
Hmm.
And then when I came out as a gay person, I also came out to my mom about that. And it was really hard for her because she also dealt with her dad and brothers doing that to her as a child.
Hmm.
And all of that, like, that was a hard thing for me to wrap around whether or not that instant, like, in my life made me who I am when it comes to my sexuality. Uh,
Yeah.
from the age of 5, like there were so many different things that I had to find cover up stories for because I didn't want to tell anyone what actually happened.
Hmm.
And there was just, it became like this snowball effect of lies that I created to like cover things up. Like I remember when I was little, like I started to like bleed from down there, and like I never told my mom that that was something. And when the doctors checked me out, they asked if something like that happened, and I lied about it. And it was just like this lifetime of lies that came out from such a horrible moment. And
Yeah.
it was my Christian upbringing and hearing all the sinful things that you do that silenced me from ever sharing that because I didn't want to go to hell and I was scared of that. So for me, and then also seeing my dad being very abusive of my mother, and he got very rough with me as well, just having all of that in my like history, and then going into a relationship where like that was what I felt like was normal. Like I didn't know what it felt like to have authoritative men in my life that were respectful and treated you like a human being. So I didn't know when to step away, as soon as someone who maybe had a healthier example might have known.
Right. Yeah, because your world, especially as a child, shapes what you literally think the world would be. I always remember there's this example. I used to really enjoy the show Scared Straight. And I remember on one of them, they had a little girl, and she was talking about like her family member who went to jail. And the counselor was like, well, not everyone goes to jail. And she's like, yes, yeah, they do. She's like, no. And like in her world, in her mind, jail truly is a place that everyone just goes because that's all that she's ever known. And it's, you know, it's a very sad example, but it's reflective of like how much what you see around you as a child reflects what you think the universe is. So if you only have examples of toxic love, abusive love, then you grow up thinking like, this is okay. This is how people show my love, and this is how they show me that they love me. And it's hard to wrap your head around the fact that it's not okay and that you deserve more and that you deserve better, especially when you don't have examples of it to show from a younger age. And it always makes me so sad how often it's like a cycle of abuse. Like it's one of those things that abuse is really one of those topics that I just can't think about too much because it gets me like really down because it almost feels like everybody deals with it. It's like, how do we live in this world where like we can't just protect kids? Like, how are we living in this world where so many kids are being hurt? Like, how many people do you talk to who have a story of a time they were abused or hurt as a child? And it makes me like, it heart-wrenchingly breaks my heart, and I don't understand it, and I don't know why it's such a huge problem, and I don't know why kids aren't protected more by everyone, especially when you have situations where like, and this is in no way, shape, or form to blame your mom or anything, but like when you have situations where like your mom went through it at a young age, like you would think she'd be like extra diligent, extra vigilant in protecting you, or at least even making sure that you talk about it, that you let them know. But I think
Yeah.
parents are people too, you know what I mean? Like, so while we think like, why didn't you, like, you would be work extra hard to protect him, well, working extra hard to protect you would also mean having to face her trauma. And not all adults are in a space, whether they have kids or not, are in a space where they're ready to face that trauma.
Yeah. Uh, that was actually the last year that I ever saw that family member. Actually, my mom's whole side of the family I haven't seen since I was 5.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason behind it was she was afraid that it might happen to my sisters. So it had nothing to do with me. She didn't
Mm-hmm.
think that I was in harm's way.
In danger, yeah.
And so it was my sisters that she was worried about. So thankfully, she had enough sense to move us away from that situation. But unfortunately, like for me, that was like too late. But like that's like one of the stories that I kind of tell people when it comes to like my faith in God, is because like I prayed so hard to never have to see him again, and my mom out of nowhere, like I didn't say anything.
Yeah,
Sure, as a child I probably changed,
that's the
because
signs, yeah.
a moment like that, you can't not change from that. I mean, it changed my life forever, but I think that situations like that are really important for parents to realize, like, you can really trust people. Like, it can be someone like at church, it can be a teacher. Like, there are so many
And
things
it's
like,
usually someone that you know, like whether we're talking about, and we've veered a little bit away from domestic violence, but it's still all in the same, you know, circle of abuse. And like it usually is somebody that you know, which is the hardest part. So it's like, who do you trust? Who do you trust? You know?
and I mean, it's something that you don't realize how it really impacts you as a person, until you start to acknowledge that it is something that happened to you. Because I mean, there are things that I am triggered by that probably wouldn't have ever been a trigger for me had I not gone through that childhood and adult relationships. Because even now, like, if someone starts to have a disagreement with me, I'm like, other side of the room, don't want you anywhere near me. I still
Hmm.
to this day, like, if someone runs up behind me and grabs my arms and holds my arms down, even if it's like as a surprise or a hug, like my body goes into a panic mode. So
Mm-hmm.
like there's a lot of different things that I have to deal with on a regular basis. And there are some times where like watching a movie can be very triggering sometimes.
Certain scenes,
And
yeah.
like it and it's not like something that's like a trigger and it's like, oh, it's a movie, calm down. Like it's almost like reliving those moments very, very vividly to where
Mm-hmm.
like your body starts to relive that moment and it starts to shake and like tears are uncontrollable. And it's something that I've worked with therapists on, but it's definitely something that I know will forever be a part of my story. Uh, and it's, I think, people who haven't experienced it or people who are in the lives of those who have experienced, you need to realize like some of the statements people make are very, very silencing to people, because I've had like the abusive boyfriend told me, so technically, like, I'm not the first person you've had sex with after he found out that my uncle had done that to me.
Yeah.
I've had people tell me, well, you're a guy, so technically, like, domestic
Yeah.
violence isn't something that you have to deal with because you could defend yourself fairly in a fight if you had to. Like, there's a lot of things that people do to belittle. And
Yeah.
then there's the people who have told me, like, people have commented on my YouTube videos where I talked about this, where, like, they're like, there's no way that this story could be true since you are Mr. Positive Talk guy on your show.
Right.
Like, one of these is a lie. And, like, that hits me because, like, a lot of times the positive that I'm putting out is something that I'm using to survive, to get through,
Yes.
to continue to do life and not let someone's horrible acts impact the rest of my life. But
Mhm.
like things that people say, like that really does impact someone who's gone through domestic violence in their lifetime.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, two things. So, yeah, I think people don't realize the long-term physical effects of it too. And like, I will still, I can't, I'm kind of the same way. First of all, I don't do big arguments. I just don't. Like, even in relationships, I'm like, we can come back and when we can talk about this, because I can't do yelling back and forth. Um, the worst is like sometimes, so I've been like in my job, I take calls, and there was a period of time where I was in like office of the president taking like those high escalation calls, which are just the worst of the worst people. It's like call after call getting yelled at. And I realized like I could handle it when they were like, oh, your company, this, blah, blah, blah. But when it started to get personal, like, you're an idiot, you're so awful, blah, 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 my body would go into like panic attack mode, especially if it was a man, especially if the voice yelling at me was a man. Like my heart would start pumping, I'd start getting really shaky, and I'd have to like, and the worst thing about panic attacks aren't even like the panic attack, at least for me, it's the coming down after it. Like I always feel like so nauseous and I just feel awful. And so for me, it's just like you said, it's something that I know I have to deal with. I know that I can't ever date anyone with a temper, and it's something that I ask people, when I'm interested in them or I'm talking to them, like, well, how do you deal with your temper? Because it's not even just like, oh, I never get mad. Like you can get mad. I don't even care if like you're a yeller, as long as you can acknowledge and love and respect me enough to know that you can't yell at me. Like you can go to the other room, do what you need to do, but you have to come back and talk to me calmly. And then in regards to your other comment about the comments people make about how like you can't be the person who went through that and the positive person, I think that, I don't know, I guess I think that sometimes because of the way, everyone's mind works differently, I think that some people don't understand that some of us are so positive because of all the bad stuff we went through. Like, because we so vividly remember the hurt and the pain and the awful feelings, it's why we put out positivity, because we want to help other people not have that. It's why we share our sad stories, because we want to help other people not feel alone, because you never know. Like some random person could be at home dealing with this same stuff and stumble upon this video, and your story or my story might help them. And that's why we put stuff out there. And it doesn't mean that we've had these great lives, because honestly, if your life is so great, like what are you, like you probably don't even realize the positivity that needs to be pumped out there. Usually that comes from overcoming stuff and then knowing what it took you, like the mental strength it took you, the mental awareness, like what you had to put into yourself to crawl out of those very dark spaces, because dealing with stuff like that is really dark and it really impacts you. So knowing what you needed to crawl out of those spaces helps you know what to help give other people, so hopefully they can leverage the same thing.
Yeah, I always kind of tell people like when it comes to like the work that I do, like I do it for the person inside of me that is still hurt by that. Like I create content and I do stuff for that child inside of me that didn't have that adult to do that for
Yeah.
him at that time. And
Mhm.
like I think that for me, like I definitely needed to learn how to have thicker skin because like that's what I always tell people when you share stuff like this publicly, be ready for people to respond to it in a way that's going to be very triggering and painful because people don't understand that in every sense. And for me, sharing stuff like that, it's hard. And then when I see some people's responses, like I get negative comments of people and I have people who assume that I'm doing what I do for attention instead of actually doing something to help people that I know need it. But it's definitely something that you have to be aware. Like once it's out there, like you're going to get the good and the bad. Um, it's really important for you to realize that the internet cannot control who like sees and responds to your story.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I've shared it many times and I've gotten a lot of beautiful responses and I've connected with a lot of amazing people. But along that journey, I've also had to like grow thicker skin and heal myself in ways
Mhm.
that now I'm having to heal from new trauma created by people who don't take the time to think before they speak. But it's definitely an ongoing process. But I think that the first step was sharing it with, it doesn't have to be the internet. It can be with people that you love. It can be with your partner. It can be with people that know the person. Because the thing that I learned is if you share it, then other people can open up about their experience as well. And that begins their healing process along the journey.
Yeah. Yeah, because they don't always have the ability to do it, or the, or sometimes even know how to do it. Um, yeah, you definitely need a thick skin for sharing your life online, because people have comments all the time, and you really have to, at least for me, just really remind myself that everything is coming at a lens of self-projection. So like for me, when someone's like, oh, you just talk about mental health because everyone is into mental health now and it gives you clout. Like to me, I used to take that personally, because it's like, well, no, I talk about it because it's important and because we're not talking about it. I want to make a difference. Now I'm just like, okay, well, I'm sorry that you think that way, but that's not the case, because I now understand that when they're accusing me of that, they're just telling me how they think. That doesn't mean that that's how I think. And I used to take it personally, like, how could anyone think that I would think that or do that? But now I'm just like, okay, you're just revealing to me how you think. And you're not actually saying how I think, because clearly you don't know, because that's not the mindset that I'm in. So that's always hard, especially when you're talking about serious. I think especially for people who, so there's a lot of influencers out there, which I have no problem with. I love it. Influence away. I'm easily influenced. I appreciate it. But I do think there are also like those of us who have a little bit more purpose behind our influence, if that makes sense. Like it's not just like, here's, this cute picture and here's where I'm doing this thing, and here it's like, here, this is a message I want to give you. Here's how I want to help you improve. And not in like a, oh, I'm your life coach way, but just like, here is me being a person helping you be a person, and hopefully helping your life in some way. So I think that when our what we put out there is for that purpose, we take it even more sensitive when people try to like cast it off as attention, because it's not like, oh yeah, I'm just showing off a cute dress with a discount. It's like, no, I'm pouring my heart and soul out to you about this very personal matter, and you're being dismissive or hurtful about it. Like, it's going to hurt us even if we try to have those, tough skin and tough barriers. But I really do try now to just not take it on, like not take other people's comments and thoughts about me onto me.
I think it's important for people to realize that if you are in a place of influence where people listen to your voice, like that means you have to be even more aware of situations that are outside of your own experiences. Like if you're an influencer, don't joke about beating up your girlfriend. Like that's not cute, it's not funny, and it's triggering to people. And it's also something that people need to realize that when it comes to domestic violence, like people make comments all the time that
All
silence
the time.
people
Yeah.
from ever sharing that they were in that situation. Like, if you're like, oh, well, Karen told me that her husband beats her, I think it's because she always runs her mouth. Like, a comment like that to
Yeah.
someone standing right in front of you that has also been physically beaten, just silence them from ever sharing that they are also in a very dangerous relationship. And I
Mhm.
think that everyone makes statements like that, and you have to be a little bit more aware and conscious of that effect that it has on the people around you. Because, I mean, I can't say how many times I've heard very triggering things where if I wasn't strong enough, like I probably would have fallen back into the depression, the black hole that I've had to climb out of many, many times by myself. And I think that when it comes to people who, I don't think anyone realizes how much strength it takes to finally admit that.
Yeah.
Because one, you're being the most vulnerable you'll ever be, sharing that someone in the world has made you feel like this big and worthless and not worth a spot on this earth. Like,
Yeah.
if someone can open up and share that, like, do not be like, oh well, maybe he was just drunk, or maybe
Right.
you just kind of rubbed him the wrong way this time. Like, don't ever make excuses for those people. Like, be there for that person that just finally gained enough strength to tell you, because that took a lot. And a small comment like, oh, maybe he was just drunk, could stop them from ever sharing it with someone else again. And that can be really dangerous for that person.
Yeah, and people don't always have to have a response for everything. Like, I honestly had to get comfortable with just being like, wow, that really sucks. Because sometimes that's all, I know sometimes that's all I need to hear. Sometimes when I'm going through it, I don't need you to tell me to cheer up, like, I'll get there. And I don't need you to try to fix my problems. It's like, I just need to express this thing that I'm going through. And I think people go to other people for that same reason, but people always want to give like an explanation or a way to make it better. And ultimately, if they really think about it, yes, it's to help that other person, but it's also to help themselves feel more comfortable. And what they need to do is take themselves out of the situation, be okay feeling uncomfortable, and just listen to that person. And, it's up to you. You always have the boundaries to say, I can't take this on, or we can't. Like, it is fully within your right to not be a soundboard for someone if it's something you can handle. Because, like, I know with me, we were talking about my depression a little bit. Like, there are times where I just can't take on any more bad news, like from anyone, because I'm barely getting by. So I think be respectful of other people's boundaries and your own boundaries as well. But if you do decide to be that landing space for someone, then let them land there safely without you feeling like you have to fix the problem or tell them how to make it better. Because A, they may not be looking for it, and B, like you said, you might see something that causes them to shut down further.
Yeah. I always say, like, questions are better than comparisons. Like, don't try to compare my story to something. Like, I've I've had people, so many people have been like, oh yeah, my brothers and I used to like beat up on each other when we were kids. I'm like, that's completely different. Like, I
Right.
appreciate you some like trying to relate to me at this moment, but uh, when your boyfriend beats you, when your dad beats you, when your uncle molests you, like those types of things, it only belittles that person when you try to compare it to some small thing that is not abuse.
Right.
And yeah, if someone just goes, wow, like that shows me that all the pain and everything that I'm feeling, it's just like you understand how extreme that is, because even the victims of those situations, like their mind can't wrap around it. Like it's hard for us to even understand how we like start adding up everything we've ever done and ask ourselves like how did we do this? Like what did
Right.
we do to get ourselves into this situation? And like it's it's really important for people to like take note of the relationships that they get themselves into, because if you don't learn from the first cycle, like you fall right back into another one. And I've seen so many friends do that, and it's a lesson that you have to learn on your own. Unfortunately, my story doesn't impact someone as much as I wish it could when it comes to not falling into one of your own abusive relationships. But it's at no point should anyone ever physically hit you. At no point, and no one should ever mentally tear you down. I think that that's the first step of any domestic abuse, is they make you feel so worthless or so alone, or they just tear you down mentally to where your defenses are down and you can't really get yourself out of that situation. I had my first boyfriend's ex, like I got left at a club because I looked at someone at the club and he got mad, and he left me at the club in a town I was not from, and his ex-boyfriend saw me there and he had seen pictures of us online, so he knew who I was, and
Yeah.
he drove me all the way back to my home state 6 hours away, and said don't come back. Like he's like it's not good, it's something he does all the time, don't do
Mhm.
it, don't come back. My boyfriend drove all the way there, apologized, and I got in the car and went right back. And it's crazy to think that that is something that I would have done, because I would never do that now. But
Right.
I
But
was
when you're in it,
I
it's
was so
it's
scared.
different. Yeah. Yeah. What finally helped you leave that relationship?
When my friend Trey, who's no longer here, he saw um, my boyfriend try to strangle me, and my friend Brittany and Trey helped me file like a restraining order on him, and they made sure that I was never by myself. They told me if I ever felt like texting him or going over to his house to call them, and they would drop everything that they had to be there for me. I remember Trey even had a shift at work and he called one of his friends and told them to come
Mhm.
over to my place to watch a movie or something until he could get off, just so that I would not fall back into that cycle. Um, and it took a long time, even after that, to like normalize and rationalize my brain back to realizing how bad that was. Um, but it took my friends really like going above and beyond, because I would have continued that cycle. Like I was with him for 2 years and we probably broke up 20 times.
Yeah.
Like, but I always went back, and it took my friends like actually believing that it was as bad as it was. Um, but it took those two people like putting their foot down and saying absolutely not. Uh, they banned him from my dorm room to where his access card couldn't get into my building, because at the time he was an RA at the school, so he could get into all the buildings.
Mhm. Yeah.
But it definitely took really strong people coming into my life and saying, you don't deserve that, and we're not going to let it continue to happen.
Yeah. I am so incredibly sorry that you had to go through all of that because you, not that anyone deserves to it, but you definitely do not. And I'm happy that your friends were there for you and that they were strong for you and that they helped you, because sometimes you need that. And like you said, some people, because you kept going back, didn't believe you. And it's so hard. It's so hard as the person seeing someone get hurt, seeing someone be in a bad situation. It's so hard taking them out of it or helping them and then seeing them go back. But I feel like you never want it to be the one situation where they're really ready to be out and you're like, oh, well, I don't believe you. It's like when they need you, they need you. And when they go back, you can't take it personal. It has nothing to do with you. It has to do with them. So I'm glad your friends didn't give up on you. I'm glad that they stuck by you and were really that strength that you needed to get out of that situation. And I hope anyone who sees this is able to be that strength for a friend as well.
Yeah. It's so important for people to realize that, like, domestic abuse and people who stay in those relationships, like, we are trained and convinced to believe the reality is we are the person in the wrong. And
Mm-hmm.
like, it can be, maybe people have kids, maybe they have finances tied together. I know that when I moved to West Virginia, I had my own banking account, but the bank I had only existed in the state of Virginia. And he convinced me to deposit all my money in his banking account. And that was a cute thing at first, thinking, oh, a joint banking account. But that became another small piece of the puzzle of his ability to control me to do anything.
Yeah.
Like, I couldn't even, like, when I got into a healthy relationship after that, I realized how trained I had become because I would ask permission to go to the bathroom. I would ask if it was okay for me to have dinner at a different time than usual. Like, I was so mentally trained to be the abused person in a relationship. And I didn't even realize how trained I had become until I was out of it and in a relationship that wasn't like that. And it was scary to think that I had, because I did all of those things to avoid being hit. So it's
Right.
like, I didn't want to get up during a movie and use the bathroom because he could get mad that I stood in front of the TV for a half a second, or like I missed an important part and he's not going to rewind it and he would get mad about that. Like, there are so many different things that you just started to do to avoid being hit or yelled at or talked down to, that
Mhm.
over time you don't realize how much you've adapted to that and how hard it is to jump into a healthy relationship and not bring all of that baggage with you.
Right. Yeah, it's I always say that I am a recovering people pleaser, but really that has to do with the domestic violence I witnessed as a child, because like while part of me I think was like, oh, I'm glad my mom stands up for herself, they think there's very much a part of me that was like, well, if she just wouldn't make him mad, he wouldn't get upset and then he wouldn't hit her. So it became this thing where if I just don't make people mad, like if I never get people upset at me, they won't get angry, and then everything will be okay. Like to a point where like when I thought I was going to get in trouble, I would get like stomach aches at the thought of getting in trouble, because you do live in such a state of hypervigilance when you're around that. Um, and I remember the first time I saw, have you ever seen the movie Sling Blade?
I've not.
No. Well, it was the first time, because we talk about people being a voice and hearing your story reflected. It was the first time when I saw that movie that I heard someone describe what it was like to be a child around that abuse in like a way that makes sense for me. Like I started sobbing, but it really is like this sense of just like, I just remember always being stressed as a child. You know what I mean? Because if I was at home, and now I have this thing about people, and maybe it's why, it's probably why I don't like anyone in my house, and I'm so like, because being at peace at home is very important to me. It's very important to me because of so many years of walking on eggshells at home, like not wanting to say the wrong thing, not wanting to do the wrong thing, worrying if someone else in the family said or did the wrong thing to set him off. Like, would there be a fight? Would today be an okay day? So when you're home, you're stressed. And then when I would go to school, I'd be stressed because my mom worked nights. so she could be home if we needed her. But that also meant like if he wasn't at work, he was at home. Like, would something happen and I wouldn't be there to protect her? So I was just constantly always stressed, like no matter what situation that I was in. And that definitely takes a toll on you and how you deal with life and how you deal with people later on. And, you know, I've really had to work past that feeling that I would get in the pit of my stomach just saying no to someone or just like possibly letting someone down. Like realizing like it's okay to say no to people. It's okay to let people down. It's okay to not do what everybody wants. But it takes time to get there, I think, for most people, but especially if you've had a history of abuse in your life.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many things in everyday life that I constantly am realizing that from dealing with that type of thing, I'm still mentally trained to respond to things in a certain way. Like when I go to work, like it is hard for me to not complete a project as quickly as possible, as perfectly as possible, because like for me, like hearing my boss, which they might just be trying to make me a better person, hearing any type of rejection or any type of critique of my work, like it sends my body into like this panic mode,
Yeah.
almost as if like it's an abusive person like hitting me or talking down to me. And it took like I have read so many self-help books, so many coaching books, so many like seminars that I've been through, and I think that I was like going through trying to find that like aha moment to feel like that's what's wrong with me. This is what needs to be fixed. This is the part that's broken that needs to be healed. And it wasn't until I read a book called Toxic Parenting
Hmm.
that it literally was like your parent did this, and as an adult you probably display this, and your parents or guardians did this, and you probably accepted this in a relationship. And it was literally like I was like, that is
Like
what
it connected
I
all the
do.
dots for you.
And
Or
I was
like
like,
those things that you do where you have to draw the lines, it matched up everything for you.
it was like, oh my gosh, yeah, that is something that I dealt with as a child, and oh my god, that is what I do as an adult. And it took me connecting those dots to realize I am an adult now. I am not a child that is dependent on another adult. I do still have like abandonment issues. I do still have like connection issues where like for me it's very important that like friendships and stuff that I have are like very strong friendships. I make sure like I'm developing more healthy ways of dealing with friendships, instead of draining myself of all energy trying to give so that my friends don't leave me and
Yes.
I'm alone. But it took, because I think a lot of times we feel the loneliness, we feel pain and all these things on the surface level. But until someone's like, well, did you deal with this as a child? Did you ever deal with this? Like, there are so many traumas that are attached to domestic violence, whether it's as a young adult or as a child. There's like a long laundry list of trauma that you experience that you aren't even aware that that trauma is tied back to that moment in your life. And when people start to say, well, if you're dealing with this, it might be because of this, or have you ever dealt with this? You know what? Have you done this as an adult? And that book, I was literally sitting there, I was like, I feel like my family, because I was also very forgiving of my mom because she was a victim in a lot of ways that I was. But
Mm.
in that situation, she was my mom. I was
Yeah.
her kid. And there were certain situations where an adult should have been standing up for me to make sure that that didn't happen to me as a child.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that it's important for people to realize that even the victim parent, in the situation, which it is bad that they are being a victim as well, but a child in those types of situations, they're going to develop trauma responses because of that. And it doesn't matter which parent's doing what, both of those can be a very negative impact on you as a child.
Yeah. And I mean, you made a great point, which actually is funny as I made my notes for my Thursday thought that I'm going to do later today, which is about that, you know, you can't help your trauma. But once you become an adult, it's still on you to unpack how you deal with it. You know what I mean? Like, I think people, I don't want to say they use excuses, but a lot of the times they'll use excuses of like the horrible things that they went through. And yes, that's horrible. And yes, that impacts you. But also, choosing not to deal with it is a choice. Choosing to lean into it instead of recognizing, hey, this is this thing I do that's bad. Let me work on fix it. Like at the end of the day, that's all a choice. You didn't choose what you were around as a child, but you're choosing how to deal with it now. And I think people need to sometimes be reminded to have like just a little more accountability because it is on you to figure out if you're going to continue those bad habits, continue that, like continue the cycle, or if you're going to be the person where that cycle stops with you and a healthy cycle in your family starts.
Yeah. And I mean, that's not something you do alone.
No,
I mean, I would hire a professional to do that with you, to walk you through that journey. And I think everyone on this planet should, because parents are not perfect. And
right.
we will forever continue the cycle of trauma until like we learn from the mistakes that were made, because a lot of times we flip it, like something that our parents did, we will do a reaction to it with the children below us, but that
Hmm.
reaction is still reacting to this where it's not healed. You are reacting in a negative way to that. So like whether you are angry at your parents and you do the complete opposite to make them angry, like it's a cycle that requires healing, and professionals are a lot more, and not all professionals, like find one that really works, that you have that moment of, wow, this person really understands me. Because as soon as you work with someone that understands you, like you feel that heal start to happen. And I am so grateful that I finally got counseling when I was in college. My boss, because I was a freshman counselor, she signed me up for sessions in college. And there were so many times where she was like, that's not your fault, right? That's not your burden to carry, right? That is like all your parents. You were a child. That you don't have to accept that as an adult. That's not the only reality for your life. You can choose your own reality. And it took a professional to help me realize that there was a lot of things I thought were my fault, that my life
Right.
was where it was, when it really wasn't. Like it was the horrible people, or the people who didn't realize that they were traumatizing me. Like it was all of that uh, mixed in with some small choices I made in my life, but a lot of my choices were based upon the world I lived in that was created by the adults in my life at that time.
Yeah, and that's why it's important too as you get older to really find that healing. I think people look for that healing in like a spouse. Like I'll find someone who loves me and will treat me right, but it's not really going to work out if you haven't figured out how to love yourself. And even with a child, I'll have a baby and that baby will love me and that baby will take care of me. And, like you're not pumping out like a replica of you. You're not pumping out like a machine. It's an actual person who's going to make choices and things like that. And you can't look to them to be your healing. You really have to take the time to find that healing for yourself so that you don't spread that pain to other people. There's a reason why there's a quote, hurt people hurt. And even if you don't mean to, you probably will if you don't take the time to heal from yourself. And, I know no matter what form or type of domestic violence situation anyone's in, it does require a lot of healing because it is very hurtful. So I'm glad that you were able to see someone. I'm still talking to someone dealing with my issues on my end. And I hope, if you're watching this, that this conversation helped you a little bit and that you will seek out help if it's available to you. I know my DMs are always open. Drummond, why do I always say your name? Drummond's DMs are always open. So we're available if you need to talk to us.
Yeah. And when it comes to resources, no matter where you're at, there are people out there that can help you get out of situations that you do not need to be in. Um, it may seem hopeless. It may seem like you have to step off the cliff to make changes, but sometimes being in a homeless shelter or being in a battered woman shelter or something like that is going to save your life in ways that you never knew. My friend Trey that pulled me out worked in Pittsburgh at a battered women's shelter and literally like worked with people in those situations. So like they are there to help you. Like they are there to help you understand that it's not your fault. They are there to help you understand that this is what a healthy relationships looks like, and this is what you're dealing with over here. This is not healthy or a true reality. It's a manipulated, narcissistic reality created by someone who doesn't deserve you or the things that you give to this world.
Mhm.
And as soon as you can take that time to put yourself in that scary moment, because it's scary to think about stepping away from any type of security that someone might give you. It's false security that they're using to control you. They can be monsters in those situations, and they will play with your brain to make you think certain ways, but find a friend that will believe you and start making those steps to get yourself out of that situation, because too often it goes too far and there's no going back after that. And if you've got kids or people that love you, none of us want to see that happen to anyone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so, so much for your time, for your
No,
transparency and your vulnerability. I know it wasn't an easy conversation. We've talked a couple times and we have great conversations. I know this was a more difficult one, but I definitely appreciate your time. I love anytime we can connect.
yeah, most definitely.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for tuning in. All right, and everybody, I hope you have a good evening.
Yeah, you
Thank
too.
you.